She looks like a camel. Just like that, without any embellishment, was how Empress Sissi described her daughter-in-law, Stephanie, in her somber diary. Daughter of King Leopold II, the infamous butcher of the Congo, Stephanie grew up under the rule of a tyrannical and absent father and a cold and indifferent mother. Her childhood was marked by silence, punishments, and profound loneliness, in a palace that resembled more a marble prison than a home. The death of her brother, the only child truly loved by their parents, opened a wound that would never heal and sealed the end of any remaining trace of affection within that family. Then came her marriage. Rudolf, the Austro-Hungarian heir, seemed like an escape from her life of suffering, but in reality, it was merely the entrance to a new prison. Even colder, more ceremonial, and more cruel. The court did not accept her. Her husband did not love her. Her mother-in-law despised her. Today you are going to discover the story of a woman forged in pain, manipulated by politics, and betrayed by history. A princess who was never the owner of her own destiny. If this story has already caught your interest, leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell, because what comes next will be even more intense. The life of Stéphanie of Belgium is a real drama, and you will want to follow every detail. Stéphanie was born at the castle of Laeken on the 21st of May of the year 1864, and she was baptized on the same day. Afterwards, there was an official ceremony 1 month later. She was the third daughter of Leopold II and Marie Henriette, a loveless couple. Her father, more interested in copper mines and imperial ambitions than in his own children, and her mother, an Austro-Hungarian archduchess, more fond of horses and musical scores than of caring for her daughters. Stéphanie grew up in a colossal palace, where loneliness, coldness, and rigid protocols prevailed. Silence reigned, and the castle windows remained open all year round, regardless of the weather. They said it was to strengthen health, but the effect was quite the opposite. The cold never left. Her elder brother Leopold was the only one who mattered. He was the heir, the true star of the family. But everything changed in the year 1869. In a cruel winter, little Leopold, barely 9 years old, fell gravely ill after an accident at the lake of the park of Laeken. He died in his mother's arms. And Stéphanie, only 4 years old, witnessed the pain that destroyed her family. Years later, she wrote, "The first event that remained deeply engraved in my memory was the death of this dear brother." The loss of Leopold not only tore away a beloved son, but also destroyed what little was left of her parents' marriage. Her mother entered a silent and eternal mourning, while her father distanced himself even further, immersed in political ambitions and in the beds of his mistresses. Sadness became the spoken language in the house. And the cold never left. In the year 1871, Stéphanie fell ill with typhus. The very high fever brought her to the brink of death, and the fear of losing another daughter dominated the household. But by a miracle, an unknown doctor suggested cold baths, and Stéphanie survived. However, the illness left her even more fragile, marked by the sensation that she would never be enough to fill the void left by the loss of her brother. The rigid discipline of the court left no room for fun or affection. Stéphanie woke up early, dressed herself, tidied her room, studied, and prayed. The punishments were severe, kneeling on dry grains or being locked in a dark room for days. Her mother believed that fun was a distraction and affection an unnecessary luxury. After her brother's death, her father even considered disinheriting his daughters. In the year 1874, Stéphanie began her formal education under the supervision of her governess, Mademoiselle Legrand. The education was rigorous, focused on tasks deemed appropriate for a princess: embroidery, music, languages, and horseback riding, but without depth. Stéphanie's life, always marked by discipline and isolation, became even more solitary after the marriage of her elder sister Louise to Prince Philip of Saxe-Coburg-Kohari in the year 1875. Then Stéphanie took on the care of her younger sister, Clémentine, and accompanied her mother on some excursions that were part of her education. In the year 1878, she was presented, at 14 years old, to Empress Sissi, and the rumors about her marriage began to grow. Her parents wanted a prestigious marriage for her, and the most frequently mentioned name was that of Archduke Rudolf, heir to the Austro-Hungarian Empire. It was March of the year 1880. The young Rudolf, Crown Prince of Austria, the one who carried the weight of an empire on his shoulders and the restless soul of a poet, disembarked in Brussels. He came by invitation of Stéphanie's father, Leopold II, the King of Belgium. Stéphanie was everything that was expected of a princess: beautiful, well-educated, gentle, and rich. When Rudolf met her, he wasted no time. He wrote to his parents saying that he had found what he was looking for. He had already rejected several candidates: princesses of Saxony, infantas of Spain, and of Portugal. But there she was, Stéphanie, one of the last available Catholic princesses in Europe. 2 days. That was the time he needed to decide everything. On the 7th of March, the proposal was made. Her father, with cold solemnity, announced the decision: "We have chosen you to be Empress of Austria and Queen of Hungary." Stéphanie, who had only heard of Rudolf in her lessons, barely knew who the prince was that now would become her future husband. Engagement announced. Done. The young Belgian princess now belonged to the opulent and suffocating world of the Habsburgs. But not everyone celebrated. Rudolf's mother, always proud of the ancient roots of her house, turned up her nose. She did not like the idea of a princess from a novice monarchy such as that of Belgium. In contrast, the emperor, more pragmatic, gave his blessing with ease. Stéphanie was then sent to Vienna. There, she would have to learn the suffocating etiquette of the imperial court. It was there that the house of cards began to collapse. The ladies-in-waiting noticed something strange. The young girl had not yet reached puberty, and worse, she did not even know what that meant. No one had ever explained it to her. A betrothed princess, unaware of her own body, thrown to the lions without even understanding what it meant to be a woman. The wedding was postponed, and Stéphanie, humiliated, had to return to Belgium. Yet the games of appearances continued. Medals were distributed, titles were granted, all to keep the glossy veneer intact. And then, on the 10th of May of the year 1881, at almost 17 years old, she returned to Vienna, this time to truly get married. It was a spectacle. The ceremony in the Church of St. Augustine gathered kings, emperors, heirs, and all the elite of Europe. The future Edward VII of England was there. The young Emperor Wilhelm II of Germany as well. Everything seemed perfect, but behind the veils, there were cracks. The fairy tale concealed a forced marriage, 2 distant souls, a fragile destiny, stitched together with protocols. But the wedding night in Luxembourg was not as Stéphanie had imagined. Rudolf, accustomed to orgies and experienced prostitutes, surely ended up frightening that virgin princess. Even so, at the beginning of the marriage, there were gestures of affection between the newlyweds, with affectionate nicknames. However, Stéphanie soon perceived Rudolf's emotional instability. He oscillated between melancholy and enthusiasm, and even when everything seemed to be fine, a constant emotional tension hovered over them. In the first months of marriage, there was an attempt at harmony, but Rudolf was a tormented man, and more he plunged into self-destructive behavior, seeking pleasure in alcohol, women, and political debates. Stéphanie of Belgium arrived at the Viennese court and soon faced the rigid etiquette of the Habsburgs, a world completely different from her Belgian court. Coming from a more reserved and sober environment, she found herself immersed in a highly ritualistic system in which everything was regulated, observed, and judged. That new world left her extremely vulnerable. Her husband's relationship with Empress Sissi was distant and complicated. Sissi rarely stayed in Vienna, preferring the Hungarian palaces, and his relationship with his father, Emperor Franz Joseph, was also distant. Thus, just like his wife, he grew up deprived of affection and with a strong desire for freedom, but without finding support in his parents. Stéphanie began to assume important duties at court, mainly when Sissi was absent, which happened almost always. She organized events and receptions, but the difficult relationship with her mother-in-law was evident. Empress Elisabeth never made the slightest effort to hide her contempt. She saw Stéphanie as a provincial princess, lacking refinement, and in private she called her the horrible camel. For Stéphanie, who had grown up in a home where affection was a rarity, that difficult relationship with Sissi made her adaptation even more painful. Sissi never accepted her as her son's wife. She was the niece of Charlotte of Belgium, a figure whom the Empress despised. They were sisters-in-law. Charlotte had married Archduke Maximilian. The relationship between them had never been good, and Sissi firmly believed that all the women of the Belgian family were insane. As the years passed, the crisis in the marriage of Stéphanie and Rudolf became increasingly evident. But in the year 1883, Stéphanie was pregnant, and it was anxiously expected that the baby would be a boy, the next heir who would ensure the continuity of the Habsburg dynasty. However, a girl was born, who was given the name Elizabeth in honor of her grandmother, Empress Sissi. As always, the birth of a girl pleased no one. Nonetheless, Stéphanie was young, and it was believed that she would soon give birth to other healthy children. However, the reality was very different. With the passing of time and the absence of a new pregnancy, the pressures and criticisms began. Stéphanie, without knowing exactly what was happening, ended up being taken to doctors, who discovered the truth. She had contracted a venereal disease from Rudolf, and the mercury-based treatment left her sterile. Unable to fulfill the primary duty expected of an imperial wife, she lost her prestige and came to be seen as an obstacle to the continuity of the Habsburg dynasty. Isolated and rejected, Stéphanie saw her importance at court vanish, and that only deepened even further the frustration and the distance between the couple. What once seemed like a promising union for the empire now turned into a marriage without affection and without a future. Rudolf, for his part, felt increasingly imprisoned within a conservative empire, in constant conflict with his father, Emperor Franz Joseph I. In the year 1888, he began a controversial relationship with Mary Vetsera, a young baroness who was nearing adulthood. The last time Stéphanie saw her husband was during the birthday celebration of Wilhelm II, at the beginning of the year 1889. There, although surrounded by friends and admirers, Rudolf was distant, reflecting the growing tension between them. A few days later, on the 30th of January of the year 1889, Rudolf and Mary were found dead at the hunting lodge of Mayerling, under circumstances officially described as a tragic mutual decision. The news shocked all of Europe. Although the official version was that of a double tragedy, many still harbor doubts about what truly happened on that fateful day. For Stéphanie, the event was devastating. Not only did she lose her husband, but she also saw her position at court collapse. Without a male heir and with the loss of her political relevance, she became an almost forgotten figure. Stéphanie was left stunned and deeply marked. Rudolf had left a letter for her, undated, in which he wrote, "Dear Stéphanie, you are free from my burdensome presence. Be at peace in your destiny, and be kind to the dear little girl, who is the only thing that remains of me." After the tragedy, her desire was clear: to flee from the oppressive atmosphere of Vienna and the court, which now seemed unbearable to her. She wished to return to her parents' home in Brussels, but neither Emperor Franz Joseph nor her own father, Leopold II, allowed her to leave Austria. As the guardian of her daughter, Elizabeth Marie, who at that time was only 5 years old, the emperor insisted that Stéphanie remain, justifying it by saying that she should focus on the well-being of the child. Even so, Stéphanie obtained permission to spend some months at Miramar Castle, near Trieste, where she lived in seclusion, seeking to recover and to dedicate herself to motherhood. In the first years after Rudolf's death, Stéphanie led a solitary life, seeking the company of her daughter and trying to find some comfort in her sorrow. But the relationship between mother and daughter gradually cooled. Stéphanie became distant from the child, who later was always with her father's family. Before becoming a widow, after discovering that Rudolf had infected her, she had initiated a secret relationship with the Polish Count Arthur Władysław Potocki, an aristocrat, a court chamberlain in Vienna, and a member of the House of Lords of the Austrian Parliament. Only her sister Louise knew about this relationship. During the dark days after Rudolf's death, Arthur remained close to Stéphanie, offering her support. However, Arthur's health was fragile, and after surgery on his tongue, he lost the ability to speak. And a little more than 1 year after Rudolf's death, the Count passed away, leaving Stéphanie deeply saddened. One more loss in her life, already marked by pain and tragedy. At the court of Vienna, Stéphanie had to endure the coldness of Empress Elisabeth, who openly avoided her, and also that of the emperor himself, whose distance made her continued presence there almost unbearable. Although she retained the title of crown princess, Stéphanie no longer held any function at the court, and she was forbidden to represent the empress. Isolated, without support, and without any official role, she began to travel frequently, dedicated herself to the arts, and embarked on long journeys. Almost 10 years after Rudolf's death, another tragedy of great proportions shook the Austro-Hungarian Empire. On the 10th of September of 1898, Empress Elisabeth was assassinated in Geneva. Although the relationship between Stéphanie and the Empress had always been distant and cold, the news of Elizabeth's death profoundly impacted her. Stéphanie recognized, even from afar, the importance of the Empress in her own story and in the destiny of the dynasty. In the attempt to reposition Stéphanie within the dynasty, Emperor Franz Joseph and King Leopold II considered a new marriage for her. This time with Archduke Franz Ferdinand, who had become the new heir. However, Franz Ferdinand rejected this proposal. He was in love with Countess Sophie Chotek, a lady-in-waiting at the Habsburg court, with whom he insisted on marrying, even against the opposition of the empire. Stéphanie, for her part, wished to marry a nobleman of lesser prestige, Count Elemer Lonye, a Hungarian aristocrat of modest origins, and moreover of Protestant faith. Fearful of her father's reaction, Stéphanie did not dare to communicate her plans to him. In October of 1899, she wrote a letter to Queen Victoria, hoping that the English sovereign might intercede for her. The response was favorable, but Leopold II reacted with fury, categorically refusing to authorize the marriage and writing a harsh letter to the Queen, saying that she should not meddle in matters that did not concern her. Feeling betrayed for not having been informed directly, Leopold broke definitively with his daughter, forbidding her return to Belgium and threatening to withdraw her title of Royal Highness. He also forbade his younger daughter, Princess Clementine, from maintaining any contact with Stéphanie, and even considered cutting her annual pension of 50,000 francs. Finally, on the 22nd of March of 1900, 11 years after the tragedy of Mayerling, Stéphanie married Count Elemer Lonye at the castle of Miramar, a marriage for love despite all the opposition. Franz Joseph, although displeased, gave his formal authorization, but as a direct consequence of the union, Stéphanie lost her imperial title and her position at the Habsburg court. Her daughter, Elisabeth Marie, remained in Vienna under the guardianship of the emperor. The Austrian press, such as the newspaper Die Presse, portrayed Stéphanie's marriage to Count Elemer Lonye as a romantic and daring gesture. The couple initially settled in the Sissi Palace in Vienna. 2 years later, she received the news of the death of her mother, Queen Marie Henriette. Stéphanie immediately departed for Belgium. However, King Leopold II refused to see her. Humiliated and rejected, Stéphanie was forced to abandon the idea of participating in the funeral ceremonies of her own mother. Years later, in 1909, Stephanie had to face the death of her father, Leopold II. 2 days before his passing, she once again attempted to seek reconciliation with him, but she was summarily rejected. Her sister Louise also returned to Belgium after their father's death. The late king had hidden a large part of his fortune in fictitious enterprises in Germany and in France, not only to prevent his daughters from inheriting, but also to ensure that this fortune would ultimately end up in the hands of his mistress. The Belgian state, trying to avoid a scandal, offered the 3 daughters of the king a compensation that seemed laughable: 2 million francs for each one. After years of legal battles and petitions, they managed to increase this amount to 5 million. Stephanie and Elimir resided in the castle of Orosvar, located in present-day Slovakia. The couple received distinguished guests such as Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and his morganatic wife, still marginalized by the court of Vienna. When on the 28th of June of 1914, Stephanie received the news of the assassination of Franz Ferdinand and his wife in Sarajevo, she firmly believed that the emperor desired the death of his nephew for daring to defy him. Stephanie even claimed that she had warned the couple about the danger, believing that Franz Joseph was aware of the threat. 4 weeks later, the continent plunged into the First World War. Stephanie set up a small hospital at her residence. While her husband took on a leadership role in the Austrian Red Cross, Stephanie acted as a nurse at home, caring for the wounded. In November of 1916, the health of Emperor Franz Joseph worsened drastically. His family was called to Vienna to be with him in his final moments. On the 21st of November, after 68 years of reign, the emperor passed away. Stephanie and her daughter took part in the solemn funeral, sitting in the 3rd row, distant from the throne, but still close enough to witness the end of an era. In January of 1917, the new Emperor Charles granted Stephanie's husband the title of Hungarian Prince with the style of His Serene Highness, a recognition of his position within the nobility. However, after the armistice, in March of 1919, the entire imperial family was forced to permanently leave Austria. But this measure did not affect Stephanie, who, in the following years, until the beginning of the Second World War, continued to live a quiet life at the castle of Orosvar, alongside her husband. The separation from politics and the imperial court finally allowed them to find peace, far from the tensions that marked the reign of the Habsburgs. The relationship between Stéphanie of Belgium and her daughter Elisabeth Marie was marked by distance and coldness since the death of Rudolf. However, during this period, Elisabeth Marie, who lived in Lower Austria, maintained an affectionate relationship with her mother, mainly expressed through correspondence. In 1922, Stephanie experienced the joy of meeting her 2 grandchildren, Franz Joseph and Ernest. Stephanie's last letter to her daughter was dated 1924, the same year Elisabeth Marie separated from her husband. In 1925, Elisabeth Marie attended her mother's silver wedding anniversary, but after that event, the 2 never met in person again. Their relationship grew even more distant when Stephanie began to view her daughter with a critical and condemnatory eye. Stephanie believed Elisabeth Marie was possessed by the devil and could not tolerate the immorality of her love life. In 1923, Stephanie began writing her memoirs with the help of the biographer Egon Korda. However, years later, she ended the collaboration, deciding to continue on her own. The manuscript was rejected by several publishers in Germany and London, but in 1934, a publishing house agreed to publish it, releasing it in German under the title, I Should Have Been Empress. The book was censored in Austria. 2 years later, it was translated and published in French. From 1944 onward, Stephanie and her husband Elimir, now elderly, still maintained a relatively active life, traveling occasionally and meeting with other exiled sovereigns, such as Ferdinand, the deposed Tsar of Bulgaria, and the former Empress Zita, her friend. However, over time, the couple began to increasingly isolate themselves, seeking a secluded life dedicated to religious activities. And from 1944, the only constant in their private life was their chaplain, the Benedictine monk Giza Karsai. She drafted her will, disinheriting her daughter, Elizabeth Marie, due to her divorce and her relationship with Leopold Petzneck, a social democratic deputy. In the will, she bequeathed her properties to the Benedictine order. This decision, marked by disappointment and bitterness, was the final expression of rejection and estrangement toward a daughter who never managed to get close to her mother. In 1944, during the war, Stephanie's castle was occupied by the SS, and she and her husband Elamir were forced to live isolated in part of the property. The following year, with the arrival of the Soviets and the worsening of Stephanie's health, the couple took refuge in the Abbey of Pannonhalma under the protection of the Red Cross. On the 23rd of August, 1945, at the age of 81, she passed away, victim of a stroke, without the presence of her daughter or descendants. Her husband survived her by less than a year. Her body was taken to the crypt of the abbey without any royal mourning, without bells ringing in her honor, without the recognition she never had in life. Belgium had forgotten her. Austria had repudiated her. Stéphanie, the Empress who never was, left behind memories that reveal a life marked by frustration and endurance. Far from the role imposed on her, she faced alone the losses and humiliations of a court that rejected her. Her story is not one of glory, but of survival. The silent struggle against a destiny that tried to suffocate her, never fully succeeding in erasing her completely.